Welcome back, everyone, to the Awful Takes podcast, where I share my awful takes with all of you guys. Whoever's listening, thank you for joining. The fact that you're still here is quite an achievement. I can't even listen to myself for that long before I start to get very angry. So thank you. My name is Nabahi.
Hello, I'm Wallied from Sergata Productions.
And we are here for another album review. This is going to be our fourth album review, and it already feels like we've done quite a few of them. So
it's kind of crazy.
It's kind of cool.
It's going by.
Yeah, so if you're joining us for the first time, this is a podcast where we talk about movies, music, and we provide our awful takes for you to either digest and take something from it or to hate us and then never watch us again. It's your choice. But we're going to keep doing it regardless. So if you're joining us on Spotify, YouTube, specifically for album reviews, we will have timestamps in the description going over each song. I feel like that's my favorite way of doing this, is kind of breaking down each song into like its own little section, you know?
Yeah, I like that a lot.
I like it too, because sometimes I'll watch album reviews and my favorite song they don't even mention.
Yeah.
I'm like,
it's like,
come on.
Where was it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's how we do it here. We break it down by song, and we kind of stay away from scoring just because of the personal feel that music has, and each person's going to have their own opinion. And I personally feel like it's a disservice to kind of just slap a number on it and call it done, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Especially for me, some of my favorite albums, I'll be honest, it was kind of hard to listen to when I first listened to it, but I grew to appreciate it.
More and more, yeah.
Yeah. All right. What are we going to be talking about, Wallied?
All right. So we got a very fascinating sea adventure of an album. It's one of my favorite albums ever made by my second favorite band of all time. So today we're talking about Ween's The Mollusk, which is one of the most incredibly fascinating albums that I have ever listened to. And so I guess to kind of give a bit of history of my love for Ween. So Ween was actually a band, like I'm sure a lot of maybe Ween fans have. I discovered them through SpongeBob, actually. And I discovered them through the SpongeBob SquarePants film because they play the song Ocean Man at the end, which I'll actually get into why that actually is a really cool idea to do. But yeah, I kind of discovered them through there. They did a couple songs for the show, actually, like the Loop de Loop song, which is really awesome. Yeah. And it wasn't until high school that I started hearing a lot about this band, and I started checking out like this album at first, and I remember really loving it, but it was a very bizarre listen that I was like, okay, I'll definitely need to listen to this again for sure. And so I kind of got a little bit more into the Ween rabbit hole the past couple of years, and I kind of find out like this album is a lot different from their other albums, because the thing with Ween that I kind of want to just kind of give you guys like a heads up on is like all of their albums, and especially their songs, are so wildly different genre-wise, where it's like they go from like rock to pop to soul to country music to noise to literally anything else in between, to like psychedelic music to sea shanties. And so the Mollusk was definitely a lot different compared to the album they had released beforehand, which was the 12 Golden Country Greats, which, believe it or not, is a whole album of Ween doing country music. And it's actually really good. And they actually got like session musicians from the country music scene to actually work on the project. And so from that, they kind of decided to take a completely different direction. And this one goes in a more sea shanty, psychedelic, kind of like life of the sea experience. And so that's kind of like a bit of like an idea of like somewhat of the concept of the album. And like every Ween album, every song is very different from the last, and it kind of balances between being absurd humor and then like actually like really heartfelt, beautiful songs. So, Nabahi, were you familiar at all with Ween? Was this an album you had heard about? What was kind of, yeah.
I am not too familiar with Ween. This album I had heard of, though. Obviously with the SpongeBob influence that this album gave towards the show, it was something I had always heard. And then obviously hearing music from Ween in the SpongeBob movie was always apparent. And but I never really heard Ween talked about too much. Obviously, I think one of the main things with Ween that I hear a lot is I feel like a lot of people kind of discover Ween when they're in college and they're looking for something really experimental. That's something that I hear always brought up is that when you're getting into Ween, you're kind of looking for something different and you are in that kind of mental state of being in college and you start to try to think like what is true art, you know, what is being different, what is creative expression, you know. Obviously I think in that era in college is maybe a little bit more existential than people might like to admit.
Oh, definitely.
But I think that is kind of the driving force behind what discovers bands like this, because that's mainly who I hear it mentioned by is a lot of college people rather than older fans, you know, or people who grew up in the 90s. I don't really ever hear them talk about Ween, you know.
Oh, really? Wow.
It really kind of comes from a lot more younger, experimental kind of individual, you know, artists, you know.
For sure.
They have an appreciation for this. With that being said, there might be a kind of tailor fit time for you to listen to this band, you know. You might be in a different headspace, whether you're younger or older, to really appreciate what's going on throughout this album, which to me is that's great because that really kind of shows you that music could be meant for you at a specific time. You know, there's oftentimes I hear songs where I'm like, it's good and I like it. But then once I kind of grew older and really kind of discovered what was being said, and then not only to mention if I lived through a situation that artist kind of went through, it just elevates it to a whole new level and you just have this whole new appreciation for it. So yeah, I hadn't really heard too much about Ween. So this was kind of like my first kind of go around, you know.
Oh, nice.
Which was really cool. There's a lot of stuff to like here, so I'm excited.
Awesome. That's great to hear. So yeah, we'll get started on the first track. So this one is I'm Dancing in the Show Tonight. And already you have this really bizarre, like cheap piano that comes into play. And already it just sets like the tone of like kind of the album pretty much, especially when you look at the cover, you're not really sure what you're in for because it's like a really crazy kind of hideous, almost like in a good way, like cover of like all these like fish combined. And so when you hear like the first song, you're just like, wait, what? And I love just like the kind of intro and like the way it kind of sucks you into like the world. It kind of just sounds like a bizarre version of like something you hear in like a kid's film basically, which I really love. And it kind of just like sets the tone of like the album. And I love a lot of like just the pitch shifting vocals of the song. It's almost like I see it from like the perspective of like somebody who's nervous and they're about to like put on this show. Like it's like you're watching this like crazy pirate film come to life. So yeah, Nabahi, what was kind of your takeaway with that first track?
It's a definitely more kind of somber opening to an album. But I guess some people could probably see this first track as kind of like a, you know, bit more laid back rather than all in your face, like starting out super aggressive or something. So I really appreciated that because it felt a lot more grounded. And I was like, okay, wow, this was pretty tame from what I was kind of expecting, you know? I was expecting something a lot more aggressive, maybe like a more grandiose statement of, this is us, this is the band, this is where we are, you know? So I actually really liked it. And like you said, the vocal effects and things like that were really great and really interesting. It's not super, super catchy, but I think this is not really trying to be that. Obviously, you kind of mentioned that Ween does have more kind of pop stuff and things like that.
Of course, yeah.
Going into this album, I would just kind of recommend for people, don't really kind of be expecting that, you know. This is songwriting on a very different approach, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not bad. It's just different, you know.
Yeah, it's a lot different compared to a lot of other intros like you kind of like would hear on an album. Yeah, this feels just kind of more of like an introduction to like the world of the album pretty much, and just kind of like an idea of like what to kind of somewhat expect, but at least with like the humor and just like the different vocals that you hear throughout the record. So yeah, I kind of love that a lot. It definitely took a bit for me to get into, but once I got into it, it's like it really clicked.
Nice.
So that was the first track. So we can get on to the second track, the title track of the album, The Mollusk, which is a lot more, again, like a lot of Ween records. It's a lot more different sounding. And this one is a lot more laid back. I love these little, like, I don't know if they're like flute samples or whatever, but it's this really cool, like, I can't do it, but it's like, and you hear this like really beautiful, like kind of guitar that sounds like something you'd hear on like Revolver by the Beatles. And I love when the vocals come in and it's like, you get an idea of like the mollusk as like this kind of like crazy kind of like sea creature. And I just really love it a lot. And I love the buildup of the track, and I love the second half, especially when it turns into like this kaleidoscopic, like it just kind of like sucks you more into the world, and it's just like it puts you in this like really awesome like trippy trance state that I really love a lot about the song. And especially with the lyrics of like the mollusk with its wandering eye that plays a bigger part actually later on in the album. So Nabaki, what was kind of your takeaway with the mollusk?
No, yeah, I like this track a lot. Like you mentioned, that kind of like flute, very translucent stereo bouncing between both headphones was just like, whoa, this is cool. And it just kind of, it comes in very subtly and then it leaves very subtly. But it's like that nice sweetness to the song that catches onto your mind, you know? I love it when there are songs that have those dynamics of kind of dark, kind of heavier stuff. Then you have those kind of sweeter notes of something that is a little different, whether it's like a flute or chimes, things like that. I love the production on it. Obviously the lyrics and stuff really just kind of puts you into this like world. A lot of like visual, you can just kind of like start to picture the feel, I guess, of what this song is going for. But yeah, it's very different from anything you probably have ever heard. Yet I really, really appreciated, again, 2 songs in, and it's still just kind of revving up, you know? It didn't jump into anything super aggressive, and you're still just kind of like in the headspace, you know? Very subtle, very kind of low, just not too out there in your face yet. Obviously the album gets there, but I feel like this was a nice kind of 2-starter to just kind of ease you into this, you know?
Definitely.
So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
That's awesome. And then obviously I think the other thing that I love so much too with the track is like, I love the spoken word passage that comes in before the blow up. And it is just such an incredible way to kind of like picture this kind of mollusk kind of wandering around. And I love that so much about the song. And I love that it really just kind of shows you like the sea creatures already so early on in the album. And so, yeah, that was The Mollusk. Fantastic track. It's one of my favorites from the album and one of my favorite Ween songs, period. And so we get to the next one, Polka Dot Tail, which is a lot more hard hitting. It's a lot more sea shanty like. And it definitely, again, leans more into like the sea creature side of the album. This crazy whale with a polka dot tail, and there's a guy with 8 fingers on his hand. And I feel like this kind of gives you more an idea of like the world of the album, like with the lyrics, like, have you ever tried to shrink like an ice cube in a sink? You know, I kind of see it as like, this is maybe some of like the magic of like that sea world that the album kind of sucks you into. And so I love just this instrumental. And I love the different breaks, and especially the second break where the synth like rises up and you hear these like crazy little synth bloops that you hear. And then the synth buildup is absolutely incredible. And then once like after the part where he says, help me, the synth just like switches, and it's like one of the best like eargasms that you've probably ever heard. And it's just like so mind blowing. And it's just like, whoa, you know, it's like, it's almost, I feel like it's like the sound of like, this is how maybe like a whale with a polka dot tail would probably sound.
Wow.
Yeah, I love the bizarre nature of that world. It just feels like the start of like this adventure you're about to go on. And so, yeah, Nabaki, what was kind of your takeaway with Polka Dot Tail?
I really liked it. I like it when tracks have that evolution. It's something that I'm always kind of a sucker for. So when you hear the track evolve and it kind of changes, is something that I always appreciate, and it always catches my eye. The lyrics and again the vocal effects and everything really leave me like in a state of like, whoa. how did they do this? You know?
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of points on this album where I'm kind of questioning, like, how did they go about recording this? Especially
in the 90s. Yeah.
This is analog effects. There's no digital or anything like that. So it's really astounding to have something super atmospheric at a time when you had to do it all by hand. You know, this was probably a very painstakingly challenging album to record.
I couldn't even imagine.
But yeah, I like this track a lot. And I like the evolution of everything. And yeah, you feel like you're a part of this kind of ride in this world, which is something that I don't think I say a lot with albums. I don't really feel like I'm ever taken on like a kind of journey, or I'm put in like a different world, at least with the albums I listen to. Obviously I'm very like kind of emotionally driven, and hearing stuff that ties into emotions is something that I naturally gravitate towards. But this is an album that really, by this track, I was like, this feels like I'm in a different place, which I don't say a lot. So it's kind of crazy to think that with this album. So yeah, I really enjoyed this track.
Dang, that's really cool. Awesome, man.
Yep.
Yeah. So then we got the next track. This is a lot shorter. One of the more shorter tracks on the album is I'll Be Your Johnny on the Spot. And this one is a lot more darker compared to the last three tracks you've listened to. And this one definitely has a little bit more of like a darker nature to the song. There's a lot more mystery, as you kind of see like the main character, I guess, of this album is like kind of like more troubled. You kind of see like he has a bit of like a troubled past. I will say there's like a really awesome guitar solo in the middle of the track. My only thing is I do wish the track was just a little bit longer, but that would be my only little complaint with this. So yeah, Nabahi, what was kind of your takeaway with this song?
For me, the solo just was awesome. Obviously I play guitar, so for me, anytime I hear solos and things like that, I'm always kind of in a state of, wow, let me watch this, let me listen to this. You know, that was my main takeaway with this track. I really love that solo. I will agree, it does feel maybe a little short. I feel like it's a nice kind of break in the first couple songs. You know, this does feel like, all right, it kind of is taking it in a different direction. At least that's how I felt.
Of course.
But yeah, I really liked it. It was a nice appetizer in this first half of the album, you know?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And it definitely gives you more an idea of like just kind of the more darker side of the album that it has to offer. You get a bit of like a taste of it with this song. But yeah, I just kind of wish it was just a tad bit longer. But yeah, and then we get on to the next track, which is one of the most fascinating songs I've ever heard. It's called Mutilated Lips. And this one is definitely one of the more weirder songs on the album, which is saying a lot because Ween is a pretty weird band. But this is definitely a lot of the weirder songs. And it's kind of like, I love just like the kind of like psych pop ballad that it goes for, especially with like the synths and the guitar and the way like the vocals rise back in throughout the verses and the hook, which I'm genuinely convinced that Steven Hillenburg listened to this hook and this is where the voice of SpongeBob comes from, because it sounds exactly like SpongeBob. But yeah, I love it very much. And and lyrically too, I think it's really fascinating because like my interpretation of kind of the song is like, I kind of see him as like using this mollusk creature as basically like kind of like an accessory to like get and gain more power and maybe love from other people. And that's kind of how I felt, at least listening to it, especially when he gets into like kind of the mutilated lips, you know, it's like maybe he's kind of describing how like the creature maybe is. So yeah, what was kind of your takeaway with this one?
Yeah, this one I would say is one of the more abrasive songs on the album for me. Definitely came out of nowhere. By the end of it, I was in a different headspace, and I was just like, that was unlike anything I had ever heard. But obviously, the production and everything, I really enjoyed hearing this song, and it's just like, I don't know how it was done. And that was one thing that I just kept like thinking with this whole album is just, I don't physically know how they did this. I'm very curious to find out more about it. But I will say this song for me was definitely one of the more challenging listens.
Yeah, of course.
I haven't really gone back to it after maybe 3 listens. So yeah, it was definitely a bit more abrasive than some of the other songs on the album, at least for me personally.
Oh, of course. Yeah. It's definitely a lot weirder. And it's definitely, especially with like the vocals and everything, it takes a bit to like get used to. I know for me, when I first listened to it, I was like, wait, what is this? But it does definitely take some warming up for sure. I will say that very much. If you're going to listen to this like for the first time, it's definitely one of the more like standout bizarro tracks on the album for sure.
Definitely. But still, again, really good, really well made. It's just be ready when this song comes on, because it is unlike most of what you have heard, but still really good. So just be ready for that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And then we get to the next track, and we got a kind of like more pirate sea shanty ballad with this one. This is the Blarney Stone, and this is actually probably one of the best sea shanties I think I've ever listened to. And I'm also convinced that this is where the voice of Mr. Krabs comes from too. And I really just love the storytelling from the captain on this one. Again, I just kind of love that, like, it kind of leans you more into this world. And I love this like captain's perspective into like kind of love, and him kind of using this Blarney Stone as like this crazy treasure that he probably found or something, you know? But yeah, it's a great perspective, and I really love it a lot. I love the accordion on the track. It's definitely like a song you'd hear at like an Irish bar. And I really love that a lot. So how did you kind of feel with this one?
Yeah, this is, for me, one of my favorites off the album. I really enjoyed it.
Sick.
Yeah. The vocal delivery, I think, is just top notch. Really does, like you said, sound like a sea shanty, you know? It's just, it surprised me. And after I heard it though, but I was like, this sounds like it's natural for this album, you know, yet I wasn't really thinking they would do something like this. So I was kind of left a bit more surprised, but I love it. I love the ebbs and flows of the melody. I just love how you're just kind of like stringing along with this cap, and obviously the chants and everything. Great.
Oi.
I don't know. I really enjoyed this one. I know for some people that might be just, they hop in your car and this song comes on, they might be like, what the hell is this? But I think that's why I like it. So yeah, this was definitely one of my favorites off the album, and I've listened to it a couple times, and I definitely find myself grooving with the melody for sure.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I never know with this one. This one is always kind of like a hit or miss track with a lot of people. So that's great to hear it connected with you.
Nice.
So yeah. And then, all right, so then we get to the next track. So we have It's Gonna Be All Right, which I think has to quite possibly be one of my favorite songs ever made. It has this very beautiful psych pop sound, and it has this really incredible like guitar melody. And it just is like one of the most hopeful, optimistic songs I think I've ever listened to, especially in the second verse. It gets me every single time. And I love just how vulnerable it is. You know, there's surprisingly like no pitch shifting or any like kind of weird voices on this one. It's definitely a lot like more of like a personal track for sure. And that chorus gives me chills every time I hear it. It is just such a incredible, beautiful ballad, and one that I will always recommend to people. Like, if you're going to get into this album, like, please check this one out. So, Nabahi, how did you kind of feel about this track?
Yeah, this was definitely one of the best tracks for me on the album. Especially lyrically, it hits very hard. A lot of lines in it just paint this picture that's just super poignant, and you really start to feel emotional, and you really start to feel like this is an expression, you know, this is an expression of this artist, you know. I really enjoyed this track. Obviously, it comes in at around 3 minutes, but it doesn't really waste any time, you know, and yet it still feels like you're in this world, you know. That's just one thing that I can say with every song on this album is it doesn't feel like any sort of weird departure or just like, oh, that feels kind of out of place. No, I still really enjoyed this track. And it's definitely one of my favorites off the album. It was a direction that I wasn't expecting, but I was glad it was there.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of one of the main reasons why I love Ween so much too, is they'll give you just those unexpected things of like, oh, here's like a really like vulnerable, emotionally hard hitting song, you know, in this like crazy, bizarre world that we've created. That's one thing I feel like Ween has always been really great at doing, especially on their later records after this, like White Pepper and Quebec, is that they will just have like these really incredible like ballads in between like all the chaos, you know, just show you like the more emotional side of the projects that they were working on like around that time, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love this song a lot. It's one of my favorites, and especially it portrays love really well, you know, which is something that I think goes even more farther in the second half that I really love a lot. And so yeah, we get to the next track on here. It's definitely a lot more of a straightforward one that goes more into the creature side. And so we got the Golden Eel, and this one is like, I really love the guitar solo on this one, and I do kind of like some of the lyrics of him like encountering this kind of like magical eel pretty much. I will say it's probably my least favorite from the song from this album, but I still really like it a lot. I still do enjoy it, but it's not one that I come back to as much often. So how did you kind of feel about this one?
Yeah, I liked this one. I liked the kind of dramatic shift it goes through in the middle. That was something I wasn't expecting. Again, I'm a sucker for that stuff when songs kind of have those big moments of it's going in one direction, and then once you hear the second part, you're like, whoa, where'd this come from? I really appreciated this song for that. But yeah, it is kind of more straightforward. Once you've heard some of the other songs on the album, this one kind of gets lost in the shuffle, maybe a little bit. But it's still, I feel like a nice kind of start to the second half. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then we get a little bit more darker on the next track, Cold Blows the Wind. And I love the lyrics of loneliness and death portrayed on this song. And it's almost like it's portraying true love in a way where it's like he will wait for this person to their grave pretty much. And it's a very fascinating look into how sometimes true love is portrayed. It almost seems like kind of like a poisonous kind of affair almost pretty much. And I really love the instrumental on this one. It's absolutely fantastic. And one that I actually loved even more on this most recent listen for sure. So how did you kind of feel about this one?
This one, yeah, it was a little bit harder for me to get into this one. However, the lyrics do paint a pretty visual picture, you know? But yeah, this was definitely one of the more kind of abrasive tracks for me. So I will say if you're kind of listening to this, it might come off maybe a little bit more rough around the edges. It's definitely a track that I want to maybe spend a little bit more time with, just to get more across than what I was getting. It's not that I think it's bad or anything, but it was a little bit more of a challenge for me.
Yeah, definitely.
But I enjoyed the production. Again, I just think production on this album is just great. So it still feels cohesive. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And then for the next one, we got Pink Eye on My Leg. And this one's just an instrumental track. So it just kind of feels like more of a break from the album. And it's pretty cool. I like this one a lot. This one also took me a bit to get into, but it's one that I really love because it just kind of has you more in that atmosphere of like the world that it's in, you know? But yeah, how did you kind of feel about this?
No, yeah, it does feel like a resting point, you know, which for an album like this, I'm kind of surprised that there is a track like this.
Yeah.
Especially with everything that we were hearing before. When I got to this track, I was like, oh, wow, they're actually doing like kind of an instrumental
intermission type of thing.
Yeah. I never would have guessed that this album would have had that. So I haven't really listened to this one too much, but it's interesting to know that they put this on there. Sometimes, again, I've mentioned this before, but sometimes with instrumentals, interludes, things like that, they just kind of become lost and you just kind of end up skipping them anyways.
Yeah, they could be hit or miss sometimes for sure.
Yeah, but I don't think this is the case with this one. I feel like this one is, there's a reason why it's there. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I kind of love the little synth little synth lead on this one. It's kind of hilarious. I kind of really love it a lot. And then, pretty simple track. Not too much to say about it. It's a really great little intermission from everything you've heard. So then we get to the next one. All right, Waving My Dick in the Wind, which is one of the funniest titles of a song I've ever heard. And it's kind of hilarious. It's definitely like the most absurd out of all the songs, surprisingly, on the album. I love the fast pace of the track. I kind of love how it's like, this guy's kind of willing to sacrifice anything for love, pretty much, even if it's having to do that. How did you kind of take this one?
No, the lyrics are very, very abrasive.
It sounds like a South Park song for sure. It sounds like something you'd hear from that.
But I mean, for me, again, with some of my favorite punk bands, they kind of have songs like this where it's just like, what the hell? So for me, I like the song, and I especially like the quick nature of it. Was something that was really cool. I ended up enjoying it. However, I think some people might be pretty put off,
especially with that title too.
However, again, for someone like me who my favorite bands, they have moments and songs like that. It wasn't too out of place for me, so I was just kind of like, oh, that's cool.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah. Again, it's kind of the same thing I was mentioning with like the Blarney Stone. This one is like a hit or miss track for a lot of people. Yeah. So it's like, it's one you kind of either love or you're just like, it's a skip for you. Yeah. But for me, I do really like it. Again, it kind of leans more into like Ween style of humor that I really love. So yeah, it definitely worked for me.
Definitely. If again, you're listening to this and, someone comes along in the car, whether it's a friend or you're an Uber driver or whatever, maybe don't play this song.
Yeah, this one will scare the ladies away.
Exactly.
So yeah, maybe don't do this one.
All right.
All right, and then we get to the next track. We got Buckingham Green, which is definitely like the most cinematic song and definitely the darkest one on the album for sure. I kind of see the lyrics as like, it's a child losing their innocence with the mollusk kind of like taking its eye away. Like I mentioned with the mollusk kind of having its wandering eye. I kind of see it as like the mollusk probably took its eye away or something really disturbing like that. It paints a really disturbing picture that I really love and has a really awesome build up, and the way the track explodes is absolutely incredible. It's one of my favorite Ween tracks ever. So yeah, Nabahi, how did you kind of feel about this one?
Like you said, very cinematic, very has a nice build up, and it really kind of just explodes into this thing you weren't expecting. And obviously the lyrics are just very dark, and the track feels very dark, but it's still really enjoyable. This is one of those kind of wow production moments where you're just kind of left in awe with what you're hearing,
Absolutely. Yeah. That's great to hear. Yeah. And then we get to the second penultimate track of the album, Ocean Man.
This is the one.
It's Ocean Man. All right, next one. No, I was kidding. I really love this song a lot. Again, this was my introduction to Ween, so I guess there's a bit of that bias there. But I think the reason why I think I love this track so much is like, I feel like my interpretation with this song is like, the kid that they were singing about in Buckingham Green, I feel like grew up to be the Ocean Man, and he kind of got sucked into like the world of the ocean, and he basically became like this crazy sea creature. That's kind of how I saw it as. But yeah, incredible instrumental, one of the catchiest hooks you'll probably ever hear on a song. Nabaki, how do you kind of feel about Ocean Man?
Yeah, super groovy. Love the vocal delivery, love the bounciness of the track. Really just sucks you in. Especially I love the intro with just those drum crashes just leading you in, and then it just carries it.
That guitar line is absolutely incredible.
Amazing. And for me personally, now thinking, obviously, if this was helped influence the show of SpongeBob, and obviously the movie, if at one point that was kind of meant to be the end, to kind of end with this song is like a nice kind of full circle moment.
Exactly.
If SpongeBob did end, and the last thing we ever saw of it was the credit sequence with this song playing, that would be very poetic and very full circle. And yeah, it really elevates the track for me in a different way. Because I remember listening to this album, And obviously I have it on and I'm not really looking at the track list or anything, at least my first go around. Hearing that now in context of this album, and obviously the way I thought of it when I was a kid, was kind of like a nice blend of both worlds. Now I'm hearing it in the context of this album, you know?
Yeah.
And then now that I kind of know the whole background of SpongeBob and that the movie was kind of meant to be that send off, I feel like that was a nice tipping of the hat towards Ween, you know?
Yeah.
You guys helped me create this. So I'm putting this song as the send off to my characters that you helped create, you know? That is a very nice tipping of the hat moment. So yeah, I really enjoyed this track. Super funny. I've used this track in the same way SpongeBob uses it when it's ended.
Oh, really?
and the movie ends and it just kind of picks up. Yeah, this track is for me just one of the best.
Yeah, that's awesome. We can just say that is the ending and that there's no other SpongeBob movies after that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, this song is incredible. I always just thought that was like such an awesome reference and detail that I didn't really get until I got more into Ween. And so I just thought when I heard that, I was like, oh, that makes sense for why this is in the movie. You know, there's actually like purpose to it. It's not just because it's like, you know, it's just there, you know,
soundtrack.
Yeah, just like a soundtrack choice. It's like, wow, there's actually care and time put into that, you know. We'll have to talk about that movie someday because I really love that movie a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, awesome song, great song. You guys all know it. You guys have seen the memes. One of the best songs ever. And then, so then we finally get to like the incredible closer of the album. And yeah, it just has such a fantastic hook and such an incredible instrumental. And I love just the lyrics of like, he's letting go of this like love that he's been talking about throughout the album and just letting just kind of the ocean kind of just take him pretty much. And he might be becoming like a new ocean man now. And it's surprisingly kind of bittersweet. I wasn't expecting that for the album. And I also kind of realized too in the second half is it's actually a much more melancholic slowed down version of like the intro track actually in the second half of the song. And so, yeah, it ends off the album really, really well. How did you kind of feel about this?
No, yeah, I really like this track. It feels, I don't know, it doesn't to me, it obviously brings kind of a natural close to the album, but it doesn't feel like kind of a closing track. It feels something that I would think would be more in like the middle of an album. But I really enjoyed it. And this is one of the ones that I've been coming back to and listening to. But yeah, obviously the track before it, super, you know, catchy, riffy and things like that. And then we come into this track, very interesting final note, you know, to say that this is the closer of the album, is big. And I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. That's really awesome to hear. So, yeah. And so, yeah. Awesome track all around, really great way, perfect send off to the album and everything you've listened to. And yeah, that was the Mollusk. And yeah, this is probably my favorite Ween album. It's hard to pick a favorite of theirs because I love all of their albums pretty much. But this is just such like an incredible concept and journey. And I love just the whole portrayal of like sea creatures that you hear throughout. And I love just this portrayal of love that you kind of see and some of the more dark undertones that you kind of see. And it's just such an incredible journey and listen throughout. And the way all the instrumentals are just like, it's so cinematic and it's just like something, it just really encapsulates the sound of like the oceans really well. And you're coming on like this pirate psychedelic adventure pretty much. And I love it so much. For tracks that I'd recommend to you guys, for you guys to check out, if you guys haven't listened to the album, I would definitely say check out, of course, the title track, The Mollusk, Polka Dot Tail, and then I would say It's Gonna Be All Right, I think are some of my favorite tracks from the album for sure.
Yeah, really, really kind of a polarizing listen, but for me in a good way. Some people might hear this and be really caught off by what you're hearing, especially after 5 tracks. You might not finish it, but I really recommend doing so. If you're ever if you're like an artist or a creator of art, definitely check this out because you hear a different form of expression. You can really hear a different reason as to why music is an expression for artists. One of the most atmospheric records I've heard, which is done for me in a different way. I feel like this one doesn't really use any kind of tricks or anything. I feel like this was deeply personal to the band and the sound that they chose to go for. I'm just glad that they stick with it on pretty much every track, Yeah. Again, it feels cohesive. Each song feels like it's a part of each other. And yeah, there's just some great music on here. Especially for you audio people, music producers. There's a lot to love on this record.
Oh, definitely.
You will definitely be left in awe. And again, just super atmospheric, which I can't really say too much about older music without crossing over into the whole psychedelic era. I feel like this was a nice evolution from that. Just for me personally, I don't really care for psychedelic rock and things like that. So this was kind of like a nice medium for me.
Oh, cool.
Again, some people might attribute this to something like Beatles when they were super psychedelic, but I think this does it in a definitely different and probably more tamed way, to where it's not using those tricks as kind of like a notice me type thing.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Again, this feels really personal to the band. And I don't really feel like there was a gimmick behind this,
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more of like that neo-psychedelia direction for sure, kind of around that time when this band was big. And of course, you had like the Flaming Lips and all that, where they would blend like rock and electronic and pop. And with this one especially, like they're kind of blending more like pirate themed music, like sea shanties and everything, And it fits really well with like the concepts and absurdities and things that Ween has always been really great at too also. So
if I were to recommend any tracks, if you were just going to try to get into this album, I personally would recommend It's Gonna Be All Right. Obviously Ocean Man, and the Blarney Stone, believe it or not, I really I really enjoyed it. So
I'm glad.
Definitely those three tracks, please. I know albums may not be too digestible for people, so if you're going to listen to maybe just a few, definitely check out the ones me and Wallied had mentioned.
Absolutely.
And maybe you might be in a different headspace enough to enjoy this album. Again, I really kind of see this as more of like experimental artists really getting something out of this album. General music fans who are into just simple chord structures and pleasing melodies and things like that, then this might not be for you. But music evolves and you get into different tastes and things that you weren't into. So this might be like a good stepping stone for you to get into something maybe a little bit more experimental further down the line.
Definitely. I will say for sure, this is probably like the most accessible Ween album aside from White Pepper, which leans more into like soft rock. But this is definitely, I feel like, a good like opening point for like jumping point for like anybody that wants to get into Ween, because it's like it definitely gives you an idea of like what this band is somewhat like. Even if all of their albums are very wildly different. But yeah, definitely, so check it out, guys, if you guys are interested. It's one of my favorite albums ever, and it's one that I will strongly recommend to a lot of people. I really love it a lot. Absolutely hilarious, but also really heartwarming and kind of heartbreaking at times, but yeah, really loved it a lot.
All right. If you haven't listened to it by now, load it up on Spotify or Apple, whatever you're doing, YouTube, and then let us know what you think.
Tidal. I'm just kidding.
Definitely trying to find more out about this album was kind of a challenge. There's not really too much out there.
Yeah, there's not a lot of info about Ween's recording process. It's kind of like little to no information about like a lot of their process and everything. But I know it was kind of like them, like Dean and Gene Ween, and then like another Andrew Weiss, and like I think like a couple other people, and that's kind of it.
Wow.
You know, I think they self-produced like a lot of the stuff by themselves from what I could gather. But yeah, it's kind of hard to find a lot of lore and info about this band, but
that's cool though.
Yeah, they're very awesome. That's a whole rabbit hole and like 2-hour video on its own, honestly. But
nice.
Yeah, no, they're great for sure. And they're a very fascinating band that I kind of tours every once in a while. But yeah, it's unfortunate they don't really make music as much anymore, unfortunately. But yeah.
So let us know what you guys think. Thank you guys for joining us on this album review. We definitely have more coming down the line. Each time at least I'm listening to music now, I'm thinking like, what's my next recommendation, you know? And it's getting to that point where it's like, wow, this is going to be really cool to talk about like some of my favorite albums and just delve into them, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
So we're just going to keep kind of pumping them out. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Let us know what you guys think of our kind of structure of how we review albums, going song by song. If that's something that works for you, or maybe doesn't. We're open to suggestions. However, that is kind of what I wanted to do, just because, like I've said, I've listened to music reviews and my favorite tracks, they just skip right over, and I'm like,
they're not even mentioned.
Not even mentioned. And I'm just like, did you hear that? Did you hear the best song? So yeah. Let us know what you guys think. We're just going to be having more album reviews coming out in the future.
I'm excited.
And hopefully we'll be having more guests on soon. And yeah, just look forward to everything Awful Takes.
Yeah. Awful. God awful.
Truly awful.
Garbage.
I'm quitting. All right.
All right.
Have a good one.